My name is Fred. My interest in Eastern philosophy has been going on for quite a number of years now. Just to give you a sense of where I'm at with that, I like Tao, holyism, Buddha, holyism. I think that sometimes when we wrap things into a formal system, we limit them, and I think it doesn't allow us to get the full benefit. From an educational background, I'm an electrical engineer. I studied VLSI design and semiconductor physics, so this has absolutely nothing to do with the field that I studied. In terms of the talk today, I always wondered why I had an appreciation for the works of Lasell and the Tao from there. But then I also had, seeming affinity with someone like Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist. And I just didn't see any real relation between Lasell and Thich Nhat Hanh. And also, I didn't have an affinity with Buddhism. I also didn't have an affinity with Taoism. So I just wanted to see, is there anything that would explain why I have this sense? So can I go into the... Yeah. Okay, so at some point, and this is somewhat of my little alter ego here, I still kind of think of myself a little hippie-like. But at one point in my life when I was in school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do from a spiritual viewpoint. I was raised a Catholic. I didn't want to do that, and so I didn't really know, which way. But what I did know was I'm not going the same way as my parents. Okay, that just wasn't going to happen. So I said, hey, I know, I'll go east. So my first exposure was a class in school. It wasn't actually called Confucianism and Taoism 101, but these were the books that I studied from. And I really liked what I saw. From Confucius, I saw these basic 8 virtues. And also, most importantly from Confucius, what I got was the 5 basic relations. Father to son, older to younger brother, husband to wife, ruler to subject, and teacher to student. It resonated with me in terms of the roles that we play in our life and trying to do your best in whatever particular role you're playing at that moment. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later. From Lasell, there's just so much, so it was a little too tough for me to list because I had more of a liking of Lasell than Confucius. I saw Confucius as a bunch of rules and regulations type of person, and Lasell is a little bit more I don't know, far out from in a certain way. So it was, Alan Watts that really put it well for me, and he said something like, and forgive me if I'm not quite right on this, but Wu Wei is action in the spirit of not being separate, of realizing so fully that you are the universe too, that your action isn't an interference, but an expression of the totality. So it's going with things as opposed to against things, so I think some people tend to confuse that with you just don't do anything. You just kind of let everything happen. I don't think it's quite like. I really liked Tao, so I wanted to find more, and this was the kind of stuff I found. I looked out there, and I read Lasell, and I read the Tao Te Ching, and I never remember reading about the horse head guy, in the picture. I don't know where this ritual came from, and in fact, so I said, well, what would Lasell think? And this is from the Tao Te Ching. When the Tao is lost, there is goodness. When goodness is lost, there is morality. When morality is lost, there is ritual. Ritual is the husk of true faith, the beginning of chaos. Now, I'll come back to this a little later on, but at this point in my path, I was really against anything ritualistic. I came from a Catholic background. Ritual wasn't something I really liked, and this spoke to me. I have a slightly different view on ritual now. I have a slightly different feeling of what it's about, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But so I was looking for Tao. I felt in all the wrong places. I just couldn't seem to find it. So I went back to the bookstore and just started to find anything that I could. And one of the things I found was this quote from Frankfurt that I liked, which was, "The fish trap exists because of the fish. Once you've gotten the fish, you can forget the trap. Words exist because of meaning. Once you've gotten the meaning, you can forget the words." Now, I want to be a little careful here. I don't think what Chuang Tzu's saying is throw away all words. Just like I don't think he would tell the fisherman to throw away the trap after he's caught the fish. You're still going to want to catch fish the next day. But you're not going to catch the same fish, just as you're not necessarily going to have to go back and get the same meaning. So I think sometimes when you've gotten the meaning from a spiritual text or whatever it may be, that's good enough. To be so hung up later on those words, I think is a little inconsistent with internalizing the teaching. So then I realized that there's a lot of words. How do I know if I've gotten the meaning? So I felt that meditation might help, and that's where I ran into Thich Nhat Hanh and his work. And one of the things I really liked there was this list of the 5 mindfulness trainings. So being aware of suffering caused by the destruction of life, I vow to cultivate compassion. Aware of suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I vow to cultivate loving kindness. Here's an interesting one. Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I vow to cultivate responsibility. It's not telling you how to lead your sexual life. It's not telling you that doing something one way is a sin versus doing something another way. But what she's saying is cultivate responsibility, and I think that's fine. I think sometimes sexual relations are a big deal. It's something that you should be responsible about, and I'm mostly saying that in the sense of being responsible to the person that you're with. Being a good partner. So it's just something where I saw it as guidance, something to get the meaning of, just giving you an indication of something you might think about without it being some kind of a hard-coded rule. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and inability to listen to others, I vow to cultivate loving speech. It goes on. This is the 5th one, having to do with consumption and good health. So this seemed to me to be very reasonable, and where it wasn't so much completely something I might have heard from Lao Tzu. I did see it something that seemed to have almost a Confucian element to it. So it just made me think, is there Tao in Buddhism? Is there some relation there? So as I wanted to do more reading into Buddhism to see what I might find, I found this from the Diamond Sutra, and the main part is this part right here and here, is that what Lao Tzu's, what the Buddha is saying here is that that a lot of these truths, and this is what I meant about isms, a lot of these truths, they're not really containable, and they're somewhat inexpressible. The other thing is that there was a lot of relation, and their foundation seemed to be very close. So this sounded familiar to me. So I looked at the Tao Te Ching, and this last part of this particular section seemed to me to be a little bit similar in the sense that the Tao is beyond is and is not. So there's this, again, this ineffable quality, this thing that you can't quite explain, this thing that you may use words to help you to get the meaning of it, but the words aren't necessarily going to help you at the experiential level of experiencing this at a deeper level. So I ended up where, Lao Tzu seems to be more like a Buddhist than a Taoist, because again, I didn't see any of that horsehead stuff, I didn't see any of that ritual stuff, and again, as I looked at least Zen Buddhism, it seemed a little similar, that there's a little less ritual, it's a little more cerebral in nature. And then Thich Nhat Hanh to me sounded somewhat like a Confucius-Lao Tzu mix. So this led me to questions like, first of all, was there any concept of Tao before Lao Tzu? Lao Tzu never comes out and says, I made up this thing, the Tao, right? He talks about the Tao, and did people actually have some notion of Tao before Lao Tzu? And Taoism itself seems to contradict the teachings of Lao Tzu. And also, is there a link between Lao Tzu and Buddhism? So what I found is I found this thing called the golden thread, believe it or not, and so I decided to look more into it. And
This is basically what it is.